What did she think would happen when she screamed, "Get a divorce"? That I'd beg her to stay, or that I'd already have the papers waiting on the table? My name is Jack Callahan, and I'm about to tell you how I stopped being a doormat and started being a man who fights back. But first, let me paint you a picture of the night everything changed. It was a Friday evening in October, the kind where the New England air bites your skin and reminds you winter's coming whether you're ready or not. I was sitting in my workshop in the basement of our Victorian house trying to fix a broken cabinet hinge for Mrs. Patterson down the street. My contracting business keeps me busy, but lately I'd been spending more time down here just to avoid the tension upstairs. Lila was getting ready for another night out. Again. The sound of her heels clicking across the hardwood floors above my head was like a countdown timer to another argument. I could hear her humming some club song, probably the same one she'd been grinding to last weekend while I sat home like an idiot, waiting for her to remember she had a husband. "Jack!" Her voice cut through the house like a buzzsaw. "Have you seen my black clutch?" I didn't answer. She'd find it. She always did. And then she'd leave, and I'd sit here wondering when my wife became a stranger who happened to share my address. The footsteps moved to the top of the basement stairs. "Jack, I'm talking to you." I set down my screwdriver and looked up at the ceiling. "In your car, probably. Where you left it last night when you stumbled in at 3 a.m. Silence. Then the click of heels getting closer to the basement door. "Don't start with me tonight," she called down. "I'm not in the mood for your jealous husband routine." Jealous husband routine. That's what she called it when I asked where she'd been or who she'd been with. As if caring about your wife's whereabouts was some kind of character flaw. I climbed the stairs, wiping my hands on an old rag. Lila stood in the kitchen, and I had to admit she looked stunning. The black dress hugged her curves perfectly, her blonde hair was styled in loose waves, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like she was dressed for a date, which I was starting to realize she probably was. "You look nice," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Special occasion?" She rolled her eyes and checked her reflection in the microwave door. "It's Friday night, Jack. Some people actually go out and have fun on Friday nights. Some people are married and have responsibilities. And some people aren't boring contractors who think excitement means watching the Weather Channel." The insult hit its mark, but I kept my face blank. I'd learned not to react to her little jabs. They'd only gotten worse over the past year, ever since she started working at First National Bank and made friends with Maggie Thompson, a divorced woman who seemed to think marriage was a prison sentence that needed serving. "Where are you going tonight?" I asked. "Out." "That's specific?" "The Rusty Anchor. Maggie's meeting us there with some friends from work." The Rusty Anchor. A dive bar on the edge of town that had been converted into some kind of nightclub, the kind of place where married women went to pretend they weren't married. "Us?" "Me and the girls from the bank." I nodded, but something in her tone felt off. There was an excitement there that didn't match a girl's night out. It was the kind of excitement you got when you were looking forward to seeing someone specific. "What time will you be home?" "I don't know, Jack. When I'm ready to come home?" "Lila, we talked about this. These late nights are getting out of hand. We barely see each other anymore." She turned to face me fully, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger or frustration, but something colder. Something that looked almost like contempt. "You know what your problem is, Jack? You think because we're married, you own me. You think I'm supposed to sit here every night watching TV with you, pretending that this is enough. I think we're supposed to be partners. I think we're supposed to want to spend time together." "Well, maybe that's where you're wrong." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I felt something shift in my chest, a door closing that I hadn't even realized was still open. "What's that supposed to mean?" She grabbed her purse from the counter, checking inside for her keys. "It means I'm 38 years old, and I'm not going to waste what's left of my youth sitting in this house, pretending to be happy." "Pretending?" "Yes, Jack. Pretending. Because that's what this is. That's what we are. We're two people who got married because it seemed like the right thing to do, and now we're stuck with each other." I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. This wasn't an argument about staying out late or spending too much money at bars. This was something bigger. This was her telling me our entire marriage was a lie. "If that's how you feel, then why are you still here?" She paused at the back door, her hand on the knob. "Good question." And then she was gone, leaving me standing in my kitchen, feeling like I'd just been hit by a truck. I walked to the window and watched her back out of the driveway in her Honda Civic. The taillights disappeared around the corner, and I was alone again. But this time felt different. This time felt final. I went back to the basement and tried to focus on the cabinet hinge, but my hands were shaking. Not from anger, but from something else. Relief, maybe? Or recognition? Because for the first time in months, Lila had been honest with me. She'd finally said what we'd both been thinking, but were too scared to admit. Our marriage was over. It had been over for a while. We'd just been too stubborn or too scared to face it. I set down my tools and climbed back upstairs. The house felt different now, quieter somehow. I walked through the rooms, looking at the pictures on the walls, the furniture we'd bought together, the little touches that were supposed to make this place feel like home. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum of a life that had stopped making sense. I poured myself a beer and sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the windows and reminding me that winter was coming. Change was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. My phone buzzed. A text from my foreman, Ricky Sullivan. Beer at Murphy's tomorrow. Sarah's got book club, so I'm free. I typed back, sure. Might have news? 3 dots appeared, then, good news or bad news? I stared at the question for a long time before typing. Depends on how you look at it. Saturday morning came with the kind of hangover that has nothing to do with alcohol and everything to do with emotional exhaustion. I'd stayed up until almost 4 a.m., sitting in my workshop, trying to make sense of what had happened with Lila. She'd come home around 2:30, stumbling through the front door like she was walking on a boat deck. I heard her bump into the hallway table, curse under her breath, then make her way upstairs. The bedroom door closed with more force than necessary, and that was it. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement that she'd basically told me our marriage was a sham. I'd slept on the couch, partly because I didn't want to deal with another confrontation, and partly because the idea of lying next to her made my skin crawl. When I woke up, she was already gone. A note on the kitchen counter said she was spending the day with her sister Kate in Portland and wouldn't be back until late. Perfect. More avoidance. I met Ricky at Murphy's pub around noon. Murphy's was the kind of place where contractors and cops went to drink beer and complain about their lives without judgment. Dark wood, dim lighting, and a bartender named Tommy who'd heard every sob story in the book and never offered advice unless you asked for it. Ricky was already there when I walked in, nursing a Budweiser and scrolling through his phone. He looked up when he saw me and immediately frowned. Jesus, Jack, you look like hell. Feel like it too. I ordered a beer and took the stool next to him. Ricky Sullivan had been my foreman for 3 years and my friend for longer than that. He was one of those guys who looked like he'd stepped out of a Boston construction site circa 1985. Thick mustache, beer gut, and hands that could crush walnuts. But he was also one of the most loyal people I'd ever met. And right now, I needed someone loyal. So what's this news you mentioned? He asked. I took a long drink of beer and tried to figure out where to start. Lila and I are done. Ricky raised an eyebrow. Done, or just fighting again? Done. She basically told me last night that our whole marriage has been a lie. Shit. He took a drink and shook his head. What happened? I told him about the conversation, about the way she'd looked at me like I was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. Ricky listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or shaking his head. You know, he said when I finished, Sarah's been saying for months that something was off with Lila. The way she dresses when she goes out, the way she talks about you when you're not around. What do you mean? Nothing specific, just little comments. Like when we had that barbecue last month and you went inside to get more beer. She made some crack about how you were so predictable and how she needed more excitement in her life. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. She said that in front of everyone. Not everyone, just Sarah and me. But yeah. The bartender, Tommy, was pretending not to listen, but I could tell he was following our conversation. In a town like ours, everyone knew everyone else's business, and a marriage falling apart was prime gossip material. There's something else, Ricky said, lowering his voice. And I probably should have told you this before, but I wasn't sure if it meant anything. What? 2 weeks ago, I was at the gas station on Route 9, and I saw Lila's car at the Sunset Motel. Middle of the afternoon on a Tuesday. The Sunset Motel was the kind of place where people went for one reason, and it wasn't to admire the architecture. You sure it was her car? Blue Honda Civic, license plate that says Bank GRL. Yeah, I'm sure. I stared at my beer, trying to process this information. Part of me wanted to be angry, but mostly I just felt tired. And strangely relieved. Because if Lila was cheating, then I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining the distance between us or the way she looked at me like I was a burden she couldn't wait to shed. Did you see who she was with? No, but there was a black Tesla in the parking spot next to hers. Looked new. A Tesla. In our town, that narrowed it down considerably. There were maybe 5 people who could afford a car like that, and I had a pretty good idea who owned a black one. Brandon Pierce, I said. Ricky nodded grimly. That's what I was thinking. Brandon Pierce, 42 years old, divorced, worked in finance, which seemed to mean he moved other people's money around and took a cut. He'd moved to town about a year ago, bought a big house on Elm Street, and immediately started making friends with all the right people, including, apparently, my wife. I'd met him a few times at bank functions. Lila worked in the foreclosure department at First National, and Pierce had some kind of consulting contract with them. He was the type of guy who wore expensive suits and talked about his portfolio and made sure everyone knew he drove a Tesla. The type of guy who probably saw married women as a challenge rather than a boundary. You want my advice? Ricky asked. Shoot. Document everything. Get a good lawyer. And whatever you do, don't let her know you know until you're ready to make your move. What kind of move? The kind where you come out on top instead of getting screwed in divorce court. I nodded, but my mind was already racing ahead. If Lila was having an affair, that changed everything. It meant I wasn't the bad guy here. It meant I had options. My phone buzzed. A text from Lila. Staying at Kate's tonight. Need some space to think? I showed the message to Ricky, who snorted. Space to think. Right. More like space to screw her boyfriend without worrying about you walking in. Probably. So what are you going to do? I finished my beer and stood up. I'm going to go home and think, and then I'm going to figure out how to stop being the victim in my own life. Ricky clapped me on the shoulder. About time. The drive home took 10 minutes, but it felt like an hour. My mind was spinning with possibilities, plans, and a growing sense of anger that surprised me with its intensity. Not just anger at Lila for cheating, but anger at myself for being so blind, for making excuses for her behavior, for accepting her contempt, for letting her make me feel like I was the problem. But that was over now. The old Jack, the one who tried to keep the peace and avoid confrontation, was done. It was time for a new approach. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the house Lila and I had bought together 3 years ago. It was a good house, solid bones, the kind of place where you were supposed to build a life and raise kids and grow old together. But that wasn't going to happen now, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I was okay with that. I had work to do. Sunday morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Lila was still at her sister's, giving me the perfect opportunity to do some investigating without looking over my shoulder. I started in our bedroom, going through her dresser drawers and closet with a systematic approach I used on construction sites. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I figured I'd know it when I saw it. In the back of her jewelry box, behind a tangle of necklaces she never wore, I found a receipt from Victoria's Secret. Dated 2 weeks ago. $87 for lingerie I'd never seen her wear. The receipt was folded small, like she'd been trying to hide it. I took a picture with my phone and kept searching. Her laptop was password protected, but I knew Lila well enough to guess. She'd always used the same password for everything. Sunshine87, her childhood dog's name and the year she graduated high school. Sure enough, it worked. Her browser history was mostly work-related sites and social media, but buried in there were several searches that made my stomach turn. How to know if your marriage is over. Signs you've outgrown your spouse. Starting over after 40. But the real goldmine was her email. There were dozens of messages between her and Maggie Thompson, her divorced friend from work. The recent ones were particularly enlightening. From Maggie, 3 days ago. How was your night with B? You looked amazing in that dress. Lila's response. Amazing as always. He makes me feel alive again, like I'm not just some contractor's boring wife. From Maggie. When are you going to tell Jack? You can't keep living this double life forever. Lila. I know, I'm just scared of the confrontation. Jack can be so intense when he's angry. Intense when I'm angry. That was rich, coming from someone who was cheating on me. I scrolled back further, looking for the beginning of whatever this was. The first mention of B was from 2 months ago. Lila to Maggie. Met someone interesting at the bank today. Brandon Pierce, the guy with the Tesla. He asked me to lunch. Maggie. The finance guy? Girl, he is hot and rich. You better be careful. Lila. It's just lunch. Besides, I'm married, remember? Maggie. Married to a guy who thinks dinner at Applebee's is fine dining. Just saying. I felt my jaw clench as I read that. I'd taken Lila to Applebee's for our anniversary last year because money was tight, and I thought she'd appreciate not having to cook. Apparently, I was wrong. The emails got progressively more intimate over the following weeks. Lunch dates turned into afternoon meetings. Afternoon meetings turned into hotel visits, and through it all, Maggie was cheering her on like some kind of infidelity coach. The most recent email was from yesterday morning while I was meeting Ricky at Murphy's. Lila to Maggie. I think I'm going to ask Jack for a divorce. I can't keep pretending anymore. Brandon says he's ready to go public with our relationship. Maggie. About time. You deserve to be happy. And Brandon can give you the life you've always wanted. I leaned back in the desk chair, staring at the screen. So that was it. Lila wasn't just having an affair. She was planning to leave me for Brandon Pierce. The conversation we'd had Friday night wasn't a moment of anger or frustration. It was her testing the waters, seeing how I'd react to the idea of our marriage being over. Well, now I knew, and now I could plan accordingly. I printed out the most damning emails and saved them to a flash drive. Then I cleared the browser history and closed the laptop, making sure everything looked exactly as I'd found it. Next, I called Sonia Kellerman, the lawyer who'd handled the legal work when I started my contracting business. Sonia was tough, smart, and had a reputation for not taking any nonsense from opposing counsel. Jack Callahan, she said when she picked up. It's been a while. What can I do for you? I need a divorce lawyer. There was a pause. I'm sorry to hear that. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Say 9 a.m.? I'll be there. And Jack? Don't do anything stupid between now and then. No confrontations, no accusations, nothing that could be used against you later. Understood. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and thinking about my next moves. Sonia was right. I couldn't let Lila know I was onto her until I was ready to act. But that didn't mean I couldn't gather more evidence. I drove to the Sunset Motel and parked across the street at a gas station. The motel was a rundown place with about 20 rooms and a neon sign that flickered between vacancy and no vacancy, like it couldn't make up its mind. Not exactly the Ritz, but I supposed it served its purpose. I didn't have to wait long. At 2:30 p.m., a blue Honda Civic pulled into the parking lot, followed closely by a black Tesla. I watched through my rearview mirror as Lila got out of her car, looked around nervously, then walked quickly to room 14. A few seconds later, Brandon Pierce emerged from the Tesla and followed her inside. I took pictures with my phone, making sure to capture both license plates and the room number. Then I waited. They stayed inside for exactly 90 minutes. When they came out, Lila looked relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in months. Pierce said something that made her laugh, then kissed her goodbye like they were a real couple instead of two people sneaking around behind their spouses' backs. Wait, spouses? I pulled out my phone and did a quick Google search for Brandon Pierce. His LinkedIn profile said he was married to someone named Jennifer Pierce, and they had 2 kids. So not only was he sleeping with my wife, but he was cheating on his own family to do it. Perfect. That was information I could use. I followed Pierce's Tesla from a safe distance as he left the motel. He drove to a large colonial house on Elm Street, the expensive part of town where the doctors and lawyers lived. I watched him pull into the driveway of a house with a perfectly manicured lawn and a swing set in the backyard. A woman came out to greet him, blonde, attractive, probably in her late 30s. She was holding a little girl who looked about 5 years old. Pierce kissed them both like he was the perfect husband and father. Then they all went inside together. I sat in my truck, staring at that house, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about a man who thought he could destroy 2 families because he was bored or entitled or just didn't care about the consequences of his actions. But he was about to learn that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences come with interest. I drove home and spent the evening planning. By the time Lila came home Monday morning, claiming she'd decided to drive back early instead of staying another night at Kate's, I was ready. She found me in the kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper like nothing had changed. Morning, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Morning. How was Kate? Fine. Good. We talked a lot. About what? She poured herself coffee and stood with her back to me. Just sister stuff, you know? I nodded and turned a page of the newspaper. I've been thinking about what you said Friday night. She tensed. What about it? About us pretending to be happy. About wasting what's left of our youth. She turned around, and I could see the wariness in her eyes. And I think you're right. For a moment, she looked relieved, then confused. You do? Yeah. I think we've been fooling ourselves for a while now, trying to make something work that just doesn't work anymore. She set down her coffee cup and studied my face. So, what are you saying? I folded the newspaper and looked at her directly. I'm saying maybe it's time we both stopped pretending and figured out what we actually want. Okay, she said slowly. What do you want? I smiled, and I could tell it wasn't the reaction she was expecting. I want to be happy, Lila, really happy, not just going through the motions. "Me too," she said, and for the first time in months, she sounded sincere. "Good," I said, standing up and putting my coffee cup in the sink. "Then we're on the same page." I kissed her cheek and headed for the door. "I've got to get to the job site. We'll talk more tonight." As I drove away, I could see her in my rearview mirror, standing in the doorway, looking confused and maybe a little worried. Good. Let her wonder what I was thinking. Let her try to figure out if I suspected anything, because in about 12 hours, she was going to find out exactly what I wanted, and it wasn't what she was expecting. My meeting with Sonia Kellerman went better than I'd hoped. She reviewed the evidence I'd gathered, the emails, the photos, the credit card receipts, and nodded approvingly. "This is good work, Jack. Very thorough. With evidence like this, we can definitely establish adultery, which will work in your favor for asset division." "What about the house? Since you owned it before the marriage and used your own money for the down payment, we can argue that it should remain yours. Her affair strengthens that position." "And my business?" "Same thing. Callahan Construction was yours before you got married. She has no claim to it." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I'd been worried that Lila would try to take half of everything I'd worked for, but apparently her decision to cheat had consequences she hadn't considered. "How long will this take?" "In Maine, there's a mandatory 60-day waiting period for divorce, but with her adultery documented, we can move quickly. I'd say 3 months, tops." "What do I do in the meantime?" "Keep documenting everything. Don't let her know you're filing until after I serve her the papers. And whatever you do, don't lose your temper. Don't give her ammunition to use against you." I nodded, but inside I was smiling. Lila had no idea what was coming. That evening, I got home before she did and set the stage. I printed out copies of the most damning emails and photos and laid them out neatly on the kitchen table. Then I poured myself a beer and waited. She walked in at 6:30, humming some pop song and looking happier than she'd been in weeks, probably because she'd spent her lunch break at the Sunset Motel again. "Hey," she called out. "What do you want for dinner? I was thinking maybe we could order Chinese." "Come into the kitchen," I said. "I want to show you something." She walked in, still smiling, and stopped dead when she saw the papers spread across the table. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, fear, and finally anger. "What is this?" she asked, but her voice was shaky. "I think you know what it is." She moved closer to the table, her eyes scanning the printed emails. I watched her face as she read her own words back to herself, saw the moment she realized how bad this looked. "You went through my computer?" "I did." "You had no right." "I had every right. You're my wife. Or at least you were until you decided to start screwing Brandon Pierce." She flinched at the bluntness of it, then tried to recover. "Jack, I can explain." "Explain what?" "Explain how you've been meeting him at cheap motels for 2 months. Explain how you've been telling your friend that I'm boring and predictable. Explain how you're planning to divorce me so you can be with him." Each question hit her like a physical blow. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, staring at the evidence of her betrayal. "It's not what you think," she said weakly. "It's exactly what I think. You're having an affair, and you've been planning to leave me for him." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out how to spin this. Finally, she looked up at me with defiance in her eyes. "So what if I am? You said yourself that we've been pretending to be happy. At least I found someone who actually makes me feel alive. By lying and cheating. By finding something real. Do you have any idea what it's like to be married to someone who thinks the height of romance is a gift card to Target? Do you have any idea what it's like to be married to someone who thinks the solution to marital problems is screwing around with other people's husbands?" That stopped her cold. "What do you mean?" "Brandon Pierce is married, Lila. He has a wife and 2 kids, so not only are you destroying our marriage, you're helping him destroy his family too." I could see the shock in her eyes. Apparently Brandon hadn't mentioned that little detail. "You're lying." I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken of Brandon with his wife and daughter. "This was taken yesterday afternoon, right after he left you at the motel." She stared at the photos, and I watched something crumble in her expression. Maybe she'd convinced herself that what she was doing wasn't that bad, that she was just following her heart or some other romantic nonsense. But seeing the evidence that her boyfriend was just as much of a liar as she was seemed to shake her. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Would it have mattered if you did?" She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. I gathered up the papers and photos. "I've filed for divorce, Lila. You'll be served with papers tomorrow." Her head snapped up. "You what?" "You wanted out of this marriage. I'm giving you what you want." "But I thought we could work something out. Maybe go to counseling or..." "Counseling? I laughed, and it came out harsher than I'd intended. You want to go to counseling now? After months of lying to my face and screwing another man? I made a mistake. You made a choice. Multiple choices. And now you get to live with the consequences. She started crying then. Big dramatic tears that might have moved me 6 months ago. But I'd seen her real face now, read her real thoughts about me and our marriage. The tears were just another performance. Where am I supposed to go? She asked. I don't know. Maybe Brandon can help you figure it out. Oh, wait. He's probably busy with his actual family. Jack, please? Can we talk about this? I stood up and looked down at her. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked small and broken. Nothing like the confident woman who'd walked out on Friday night telling me she needed more excitement in her life. But then I remembered the emails, the lies, the way she'd looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. The sympathy died. We are talking about it. I'm talking and you're listening. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. After that, you're trespassing. You can't kick me out of my own house. It's not your house. I owned it before we got married, and I'll own it after we're divorced. My lawyer was very clear about that. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. I don't know who you are anymore. I'm the same person I've always been. The difference is, I'm not going to let you walk all over me anymore. I headed for the door, then stopped and looked back at her. Oh, and Lila. You might want to call Brandon and let him know that his wife might be getting some interesting photos in her mailbox soon. You know, just so he can prepare his own explanation. The look of horror on her face was almost worth everything I'd been through. Almost. The next 3 days were a masterclass in watching someone's world fall apart in real time. Tuesday morning, Lila was served with divorce papers at the bank. According to Maggie Thompson, who apparently couldn't keep her mouth shut about anything, Lila had a complete meltdown in the break room, crying and calling me every name in the book. Tuesday afternoon, I mailed copies of the motel photos to Jennifer Pierce at her home address. I didn't include a note or explanation. I figured the pictures would speak for themselves. Wednesday morning, Brandon Pierce called me. We need to talk, he said. His voice was tight with anger, but I could hear the fear underneath. I don't think we do. You destroyed my marriage. No, you destroyed your marriage. I just provided the documentation. My wife kicked me out. My kids won't talk to me. That's unfortunate. You son of a bitch, you don't understand what you've done. I understand perfectly. You thought you could screw my wife without consequences. You were wrong. There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Less angry, more desperate. Look, Jack, I know you're pissed. I get it. But this doesn't have to get any worse. We can work something out. What did you have in mind? I'll end things with Lila. Clean break. You don't send any more photos to my wife, and I disappear from your life completely. I almost laughed. You think this is about you and Lila? You think I care if you keep screwing her? Then what do you want? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to learn that you can't just take whatever you want without paying a price. I'm paying a price. I lost my family. Good. Maybe the next married woman you meet will be safer because of it. I hung up on him. Wednesday evening, Lila came home with red eyes and a defeated expression. She'd been staying at Maggie's house since our confrontation, but apparently she needed more clothes. How long are you going to punish me? She asked as she packed a suitcase. I'm not punishing you. I'm divorcing you. There's a difference. You destroyed Brandon's marriage. Brandon destroyed his own marriage, just like you destroyed ours. She turned to face me, and I could see the anger building in her eyes. You know what? Fine. You want to be vindictive and cruel? Go ahead. But don't pretend you're the innocent victim here. How am I not the victim here? Because you drove me to this. You think I wanted to have an affair? You think I wanted to fall for someone else? I think you wanted excitement, and you didn't care who got hurt while you found it. I was suffocating in this marriage. You never wanted to go anywhere or do anything. You were perfectly happy to come home every day and watch TV and go to bed at 10 o'clock like we were 80 years old. So you cheated. So I found someone who made me feel alive again. By lying to me every day for 2 months. She threw a dress into her suitcase with more force than necessary. I tried to talk to you about how I was feeling. I tried to tell you that I needed more from this relationship. When? When did you try to talk to me? All the time, but you never listened. You just assumed everything was fine because it was fine for you. I thought back over the past year, trying to remember conversations where she'd expressed unhappiness. There had been complaints about our social life, comments about wanting to travel more, suggestions that we try new restaurants or activities, but nothing that sounded like I'm thinking about having an affair. So instead of being direct about what you needed, you decided to get it from someone else. I didn't plan for this to happen. But once it did happen, you kept it happening for 2 months. She zipped up her suitcase and turned to face me. You know what the worst part is? I actually feel sorry for you. Why's that? Because you're so focused on being right that you can't see how you contributed to this mess. You're going to end up alone, Jack, and you're going to tell yourself it's because I was a terrible person, but the truth is, you just weren't enough. The words were designed to hurt, and they did, but they also clarified something for me. You're right, I said. I wasn't enough. For you, but that doesn't make me a bad person, Lila. It just makes us incompatible. She stared at me for a moment, like she was trying to figure out if I was being sarcastic. The difference between us, I continued, is that when I realized we had problems, I wanted to fix them. When you realized we had problems, you wanted to replace me. That's not, it is, and deep down, you know it is. That's why you're so angry right now. Not because I caught you, but because you know what you did was wrong, and you can't figure out how to make it my fault. She picked up her suitcase and headed for the door. I'll be back for the rest of my things this weekend. I'll be at Ricky's job site, keys under the flower pot. She paused in the doorway. EL, are you really not going to fight for us at all? There is no us, Lila. There hasn't been for months. You made sure of that. After she left, I sat in my living room, drinking a beer and thinking about what she'd said. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had gotten too comfortable, too complacent. Maybe I should have seen the signs that she was unhappy and done something about it. But then I thought about the emails, about the way she'd talked about me to Maggie, about the lies she'd told and the elaborate deception she'd maintained. And I realized that while I might not have been the perfect husband, she hadn't exactly been the perfect wife either. The difference was, when I was unhappy, I tried to work on the marriage. When she was unhappy, she worked on finding someone else. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Jennifer Pierce. Thank you for the photos. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. I thought you should know that Brandon is telling people you blackmailed him. I wanted you to know the truth. You did the right thing. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I'm not. I'm sorry it took this long. I set down my phone and finished my beer. Outside, it was starting to rain, the kind of steady drizzle that could last for hours. But inside, for the first time in months, I felt calm. It was over. The marriage, the lies, the pretending everything was fine when it obviously wasn't. It was all over, and I could finally start figuring out what came next. I thought about Lila's prediction that I'd end up alone. Maybe she was right. Maybe I would. But if the alternative was being with someone who thought so little of me that she could lie to my face for months while screwing someone else, then alone didn't sound so bad. At least when you're alone, you know where you stand. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in Murphy's pub with Ricky, celebrating the completion of our biggest contract of the year, a full renovation of the old Hartley mansion on the outskirts of town. It had been a challenging job, but we'd finished on time and under budget, and the client was thrilled. To not having to deal with other people's relationship drama, Ricky said, raising his beer. I'll drink to that. We clinked glasses, and I realized I meant it. The past month and a half had been the most peaceful I'd felt in years. No more walking on eggshells, no more wondering what mood Lila would be in when she came home, no more pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Any word on the divorce? Ricky asked. Should be finalized next week. Lila signed everything without contesting it. Smart of her. I think she realized she didn't have much choice. Hard to argue for alimony when you're the one who cheated. The truth was, Lila had tried to argue for alimony. Her lawyer had claimed she deserved compensation for emotional distress and loss of lifestyle. But when Sonia presented the evidence of the affair, along with documentation that Lila had been planning to leave me anyway, that argument fell apart pretty quickly. What about Pierce? What about him? I heard he's been telling people you ruined his life. I shrugged. His life was already ruined. He just didn't know it yet. That was true. According to the gossip mill, which in a small town was more reliable than the internet, Brandon Pierce's divorce was getting ugly. His wife was taking him for everything she could get, and she had every right to. He'd lost his consulting contract with the bank, probably because no one wanted to work with someone who'd been caught having an affair with an employee, and his kids, who were old enough to understand what had happened, wanted nothing to do with him. You ever feel bad about it? Ricky asked. About what? Destroying his marriage. I thought about it for a moment. No, I feel bad for his wife and kids. They didn't deserve what he put them through, but him? He made his choices. Fair enough. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Brandon. We need to talk. It's important." I showed the message to Ricky, who snorted. "What do you think he wants?" "Probably to blame me for everything that's happened to him." "You going to respond?" I thought about it, then typed back, "No, we don't." A few seconds later, another message. "I'm outside Murphy's. 5 minutes of your time, please." I looked out the window and saw Brandon Pierce standing next to a beat-up Honda Civic. The Tesla was apparently gone, probably repossessed or sold to pay for his divorce lawyer. "He's outside," I said. Ricky craned his neck to look. "Jesus, he looks like hell." Pierce looked wrecked through the window, thin, sleepless, desperate. Ricky offered to run him off, but I went outside. Pierce had 5 minutes. He said Lila had called daily for 2 weeks, begging him back, and he'd told her no. Then he warned me. She planned to claim I threatened him, that I blackmailed him into ending it. I almost laughed. I had documentation, nothing illegal. Pierce added one more detail. The bank fired her for using work resources to email him. He apologized, then left. Inside, Sonia texted. The judge signed the decree. I toasted freedom, deleted Lila's apology, and watched the sunset.